This is Ryan Finkelstein, host of Locked On Mets, and on today's show, we're not going to focus at all on the game that took place on Tuesday night as the Mets lost 8-0, but instead, I'm going to make my plea to Steve Cohen to please give Theo Epstein a ridiculous contract this offseason and have him head up your baseball operations.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So as you guys are watching this or listening to this, there's going to be a piece that I wrote that I'll go live at some point on Wednesday for justbaseball.com where I talk about this idea of Theo Epstein coming to the Mets. And I know I'm not the first to suggest this. This has been kind of a popular topic of discussion ever since Steve Cohen bought the team and has owned the Mets. And there has been that idea that he wanted to get a top flight executive. Theo just makes natural sense, right? A guy who's available right now, who has the biggest resume you can imagine, who could come in and just give you the most credible possible person to spearhead the next era of Mets baseball. Well, I think there's been a lot of pushback to the notion that Theo would want this job. Why would he want to get back into this competition? He's already done everything you could ask for. His path to Cooperstown has been paved. He ended the curse of the Bambino. He ended the curse of the Billy Goat. Why even try to tackle the Mets' curse of schmuckness? There's no reason to. It's been 35 years since the Mets have won a World Series, and I think there is maybe this sentiment around baseball that, you know, there's anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And I don't think that Steve Cohen's brashness is really helping the situation. I think there's some that would say, why do you want to go work with that guy if he's going to be really emotional all the time? And is that the best opportunity? Well, here's what I'll say. Steve Cohen has the ability to write Theo Epstein a check for $50 million over 5 years. And I'll be honest here, I don't know what I wouldn't do for $50 million. The list is pretty small. And Theo has made his money, but even if he wants to one day be the commissioner of baseball, he's on that track right now. He's in the league office. There's a ladder that he has to climb to get there. The guy is still pretty young. He could take a 5-year detour, cash one last monster check, and also get back in the competition. To think that Theo Epstein does not still have some ego and wanting to compete, that competitive fire has left him, it's pretty ludicrous. I'm sorry. These executives are just as competitive as the players. And honestly, because it takes place in the shadows, they're almost more cutthroat. And he just spent the last 4 or 5 years in Chicago pushing up against that wall that was the Dodgers. And I'm sure he looked at what the Dodgers were able to do, the money that was being spent. And after the Cubs won their World Series, sure, they spent money, but not quite on that same level as the Dodgers. If he has a conversation with Steve Cohen and Steve says, hey, I'm willing to go up to $250 million in the payroll this year. I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z. Whatever you want, whatever you tell me, I will provide it for you. Are you telling me that's not going to be a little bit enticing for Theo Epstein? An opportunity to have one last stop? Because even if he doesn't win a World Series, if he comes in for 5 years, wins a couple of division titles, and makes the Mets credible and a perennial contender, he can walk away cashing that last check, and no one is going to bat an eye or say his legacy is tarnished. Honestly, even if he flamed out, his legacy still isn't going to actually be tarnished. We have a short memory in sports a lot of times, and when you really look back and zoom out and say, what was Theo Epstein as an executive? Nothing he could do can really change that. So there isn't really this great risk. The question is only, does he want to do it? Is he really done? Is he really at the point where he has achieved all he could want to achieve, and he just has put that part of his past behind him? Maybe. But I also think there's still a competitor in Theo Epstein. And that maybe even extends past just the baseball field. How do you think he felt in 2014 when the Dodgers went out and they get Andrew Freeman? And they give this guy who was obviously a very great executive with what he was able to do with nothing in Tampa and take that team to a World Series in 2008. And so they said, hey, you know what? We're just going to pay this guy, regardless of what's on his resume as far as a World Series championship, despite the fact he's only 37. We're giving him $35 million over 5 years. Well, you think Theo, who got 18.5 from the Cubs a couple of years earlier, looked at that and said, oh, yeah, I should definitely be getting paid half as much as this kid? No. And then Friedman got another contract from the Dodgers. We don't know what that was worth because the executive contracts aren't always made public, but we do know that Theo got a second deal with the Cubs that was rumored to be around 25 million. So you're looking at the comparison there. Friedman has been, making way more than Theo has. And this could be his opportunity to at least say, hey, I have the distinction of being the highest paid executive in the sport. Right. And that's something that is also probably very enticing to Theo Epstein. I also want to talk a little bit more in just a minute about what Theo Epstein could have done differently at this trade deadline. What would it mean to have an executive like that? And we'll also get into kind of what ultimately the Mets should be going for in 2022 and why Theo can really help them get where they need to go. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about BetOnline. It's that time of year again, and all eyes are now turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron for the start of the football season. And as always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. Get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest, which opens now at BetOnline. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus with our promo code Locked On. Be sure to take advantage of their opening day super promo where you can make a bet on the first game of the season on Thursday, September 9th, between the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Buccaneers, and the Dallas Cowboys. If you lose, your wager will be refunded up to $25 for new customers only when signing up and using the promo code NFL100. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. So I want to talk a little bit here about how Theo Epstein could have managed that trade deadline differently. What would have been different if the Mets had somebody like Theo Epstein running their team as opposed to Zach Scott? I talked about this on yesterday's show with Ben Kaspick, host of Locked On Giants. We kind of compared the packages that were traded for Chris Bryant and Javier Baez, both players that were part of Theo Epstein's Cubs. And the Giants maybe gave up less to get the better player in Bryant. And we talked about it and how the Mets were maybe looking at Javier Baez because of the connection with Francisco Lindor, and that was kind of their clear target. And also, I think the Giants knew that Baez had more value to the Mets than he had to any other team that was on the market. So Jed Hoyer was very smart. This is, of course, the number 2 to Theo Epstein for all those years, had all that experience. Now he can be the guy that's running a team that has the same type of strength as Theo does, as all of the top executives in the sport. He was able to look at Zach Scott as this young pup that he is, the interim GM, and he basically kind of played him. I think he did. I think he knew that he had to get Baez to the Mets. That was the number one goal. And he was able to get Pete Crow Armstrong out of the Mets to make that deal happen. And I don't think that Zach Scott, as a guy who's been an analyst, I don't get that trade and say, yeah, this is the value I want to give up. But he was pressured from Steve Cohen. He was pressured from Francisco Lindor. There was this idea that the Mets had to get something done, and Baez might have been the answer. And I think a Theo Epstein could take that exact same situation and be the guy that tells Steve Cohen no. That to be the guy that tells Francisco Lindor, I know Baez is your boy, but guess what? Chris Bryant's the better player. And if the Mets had that level of strength going into the deadline and they had a clear list of priorities, they could have talked to the Cubs and said, look, if you want Javier Baez to be a Met, we'll give you Jalen Palmer and Thomas Apucky. They could have completely changed the leverage in the situation by saying, this is what we're willing to offer. Go find a better package. See what better package is out there for Javi Baez and his 37% strikeout rate. Let's see what's out there. But I'll tell you, if you want Pete Crow Armstrong, if you want any of our top guys, you're going to have to give us Chris Bryant. And if they were able to draw that line in the sand. And sometimes you don't cross that line. Sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand and you have to have the strength to just say, sorry, we couldn't get the right deal done. But if they had done that, and if they had someone like Theo Epstein who is comfortable in those tight spots, who has managed a million trade deadlines, they could have had the strength to pull out a much better player in Chris Bryant, and also to be able to delegate, to get everyone on the same page, to work on other deals, to work on other opportunities. The Mets got caught a little flat-footed. You had Atlanta, who was able to swing all of these deals at the deadline. Anthopoulos has a lot more experience than Zach Scott. He was able to make a lot of moves. You had Dombrowski with the Phillies, more experience, able to plug a couple more holes, make some more moves. And the Mets were trying to get the Baez deal done. They were apparently trying to get both Baez and Bryant. They were swinging for the fences. They were going for the home run. They were in first place, and they weren't able to manage those negotiations. And also, look around, try to find the bargains. See, Jorge Soler's out there. The Braves end up scooping him up. Was he having a good year? No, but he profiles as a guy that can break out. Adam Duvall, another one the Braves got, a guy that wasn't elite, wasn't going to cost a lot to get, but you know what? He can go through a week and hit 4 or 5 home runs and help you win a bunch of ball games and go on a winning streak, which ultimately can win you the division. The Mets didn't do any of that. And I think that not having someone like Theo Epstein is the biggest reason why they have dropped the ball this season. It really is. So as much as we want to talk about what the Mets have to do in the offseason, to me, the most important thing is to figure out who's going to sit atop your organization. And for 5 years, if Theo Epstein can come in, can identify the Farhans that are still out there working for other teams, and the Mets can pour a lot of money into building out that super front office that has been a pipe dream for the Mets ever since Sandy Alderson came in originally, and we thought Moneyball was coming to New York with a higher payroll. That's what the original Alderson dream was going to be, but this was right after the Madoff scandal, and the Wilpons were more kind of like, let's bring Moneyball with Moneyball prices to New York City. And Sandy Alderson did the best he could, but I just do not think that we're at a point anymore where Sandy Alderson is the guy that you want to top your organization, and you need more experience than Zach Scott. That's where Theo Epstein comes in. The Mets can't spare any expense. They got to get this guy. And if they do, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities and a lot of things they can do this offseason. And that's what we're going to talk about in just a minute. But today's episode is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Green Room is the first social audio platform made for sports fans. The app is free to download, and once you're in, you can talk with me, other fans, athletes, and insiders in real time about your favorite team or sport. I host my Spotify Green Rooms on Tuesdays now, where you can finally join in on the conversation you listen to here every day. Go download the free Green Room app now, which is currently available on all devices. Be sure to create a profile, link your Twitter, join the MLB group for the latest league updates, and follow me at Finkelstein Ryan to be notified when my room goes live. I know you don't want to miss it. I will be live on Tuesdays around game time. I can't wait to hear everyone's thoughts on the Mets. I'll see you there. Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports. Now, we have talked about why Theo would want to come to the Mets, why the Mets would want Theo. Let me put on my conspiracy theorist hat for a minute here. Because guess what? This has all been ironed out. What if I told you that Javier Baez came to the Mets simply because he is laying the groundwork for Theo Epstein? That maybe Jed Hoyer, little wink deal with his former pal Theo. Let's just send Chris over to San Francisco, let him win a World Series, and then he gets that big money from Steve Cohen. They're all just kind of on the same page. The Mets with DeGrom out, they don't got a real chance this year. Let's send him out to San Francisco, let him play for the best team in baseball, and then we're going to bring him into the fold. You could have him next year. Maybe that's what all this is about. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous, but the thing that Theo Epstein would bring to the Mets is the ability to bring in some of those guys that are going to be free agents, and Chris Bryant is an interesting one. I don't know what relationship they necessarily still have. I don't know if it's on good terms, on bad terms. I'm not quite sure. But with the resources, that is an avenue. And the other thing, I just think overall, it is the ability to have an executive that'll go into a negotiation for a free agent and won't be intimidated by any agent. A guy that will go into those trade talks and will get the best deal possible. And most importantly, having the guy that can build out the entire infrastructure of what the Mets are trying to accomplish. Because as I've said, it really does not necessarily matter if Theo Epstein wins a World Series for the Mets. You're just trying to get him to the point where he can look at every crevice of your organization and say, okay, what are you guys doing wrong? What are you doing right? What do we have to improve? Where do we have to pour our resources? How can we get better? As much as you can nitpick what he did most recently with the Cubs, they were generally a winning team every year. They found a way to compete in what was usually a very good NL Central, and they were able to win the division title, and they were able to go into the playoffs. And sure, they had their failures. They lost some wild card games, wild card rounds. They weren't exactly what we thought they were going to be in 2016, but they were still far better than what the Mets have been. And I just think that if you could bring a Theo Epstein to this Mets team, you're going to see a lot. You're going to see a better product on the field, but more importantly, you're going to see less of these big misses and huge mistakes. And also, I just think that the Mets need somebody with that type of a stature that can keep Steve Cohen in check, that can create a real clear chain of command where everyone can kind of fall into line. And I think that's what Theo would provide for this Mets team. So when I talk about where you spend, how you spend, what you spend on, you have to realize that there is definitely a need to spend big, but that spending big could just be with the front office. And I think what is the beautiful thing that really makes this job attractive is you don't have to go into a full rebuild. There is Jacob deGrom in place, Francisco Lindor in place, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, Edwin Diaz. There's good players that are on relatively good contracts. And you have the ability to do more. And when it comes to the farm system, it's very top heavy. It needs to be built up. But because you have the resources of Steve Cohen, that can be done organically. You don't have to trade Brandon Nimmo before he hits free agency or Jacob deGrom and rebuild the farm that way. You're going to have probably 2 top 15 picks the way this season's going. So that's 2 picks next year that can help build out that farm. You are going to have international spending and free agency. You are going to be able to really just build that thing organically, while in the short term being a high price luxury tax team that will cost a ton, but you can solve a lot of your problems through free agency in the short term. And I think that's what they're going to have to do, is try to focus on getting guys to come in on some shorter term deals, even if they are high money, because the Mets don't want to lock themselves into one team and say, that's our team for the next 7 years. We got Francisco Lindor and Javi Baez and Carlos Correa all under 7+ year deals. And this is our team. This is our group. We're just going to stick with this. But you might be able to surprisingly get Javier Baez on a shorter term deal for a high average annual value. You might be able to find the certain free agents that come back. Maybe Michael Conforto and Noah Syndergaard come back on the qualifying offer. All right, now your team looks a lot better. Who knows what you're going to do with Marcus Stroman? There's a lot of things the Mets can try to accomplish this offseason. And I think that once you figure out the front office, get that squared away, everything else is going to fall into place. And that's why the one contract, the one thing that has to be done this offseason, Steve Cohen needs to call up Theo Epstein, write him a blank check, and say, when do you start?